The metabolic time bomb defying type 2 diabetes. As we age, cellular machinery falters, turning basic biological processes into potential threats. Type 2 diabetes is not merely a diagnosis, it is a systemic failure, a silent erosion of vitality targeting seniors with ruthless precision. Yet this metabolic collapse is not inevitable. By decoding the physiological triggers of insulin resistance, we can reverse the clock and fortify the body against this chronic adversary. The strategy for survival begins with the fundamental fuel we consume, demanding a radical and immediate reconstruction of the daily menu.
The biochemical siege deconstructing the low-sugar imperative. To understand the catastrophic impact of a high-sugar diet on the elderly physiology, one must first abandon the simplistic notion of food as mere fuel. In the context of the aging body, food is chemical information. Every bite instructs the endocrine system to either repair or destroy. For the geriatric population, the consumption of refined sugars and high glycemic carbohydrates constitutes a form of slow-motion metabolic poisoning. The primary directive in preventing type 2 diabetes is the rigorous implementation of a healthy, low-sugar diet, but the mechanics behind this recommendation are far more complex and terrifying than standard dietary advice suggests. When an elderly individual consumes a meal heavy in refined carbohydrates, such as white rice, pastries, or sugary beverages, they are not merely ingesting calories, they are initiating a violent physiological event known as postprandial hyperglycemia. In a younger, metabolically flexible body, the pancreas responds with a robust surge of insulin, the hormone responsible for ushering glucose from the bloodstream into the cells. However, the aging pancreas is often an organ under duress, suffering from years of wear and tear, resulting in a diminished capacity to produce insulin rapidly. This phenomenon, coupled with the natural age-related decline in insulin sensitivity at the cellular level, creates a perfect storm for glucose toxicity. The investigative lens must focus sharply on the specific villains of the modern pantry. White rice, often viewed as a harmless staple in many cultures, acts with the speed of pure glucose once it hits the digestive tract. Stripped of its bran and germ, the components that contain fiber and essential nutrients, the starchy endosperm is rapidly hydrolyzed by amylase enzymes in the saliva and gut. This results in the torrential flood of glucose entering the bloodstream. For a senior citizen whose skeletal muscles, the primary disposal site for glucose, may be atrophied due to sarcopenia, there is simply nowhere for the sugar to go. It remains in the vascular system, binding to proteins in a process called glycation. This reaction produces advanced glycation end products, AGEs, sticky molecules that stiffen blood vessels, cloud the lenses of the eyes, and gum up the delicate filtration units of the kidneys. The dietary intervention, therefore,
is not just about counting calories, it is about mitigating this molecular damage. The shift toward a low-sugar paradigm is a vascular preservation strategy. By eliminating sweets and sugary drinks, the elderly patient effectively lowers the demand placed on their failing beta cells, preserving whatever pancreatic function remains. Furthermore, the implementation of specific dietary protocols such as the DASH, Dietary Approaches to Stop Hypertension, diet, or a strict low glycemic index GI regimen offers a structured defense against metabolic collapse. The DASH diet, originally engineered by the National Institutes of Health to combat high blood pressure, has emerged in longitudinal studies as a potent weapon against diabetes. Its efficacy lies in its nutrient density and high potassium, magnesium, and calcium content, which collectively improve insulin signaling. Unlike fad diets that demonize entire macronutrient groups, the low GI and DASH approaches emphasize the quality of carbohydrates. This is a critical distinction for the elderly, who often require carbohydrates for energy but cannot handle the volatility of simple sugars. By consuming complex carbohydrates found in vegetables and whole grains, the digestive process is mechanically slowed. The fiber matrix in these foods acts as a physical barrier, delaying the enzymatic breakdown of starch and resulting in a slow, steady trickle of glucose into the blood rather than a tsunami. This stability allows the sluggish geriatric pancreas to keep up with demand, preventing the dangerous spikes that lead to insulin resistance. The cultural and psychological dimensions of this dietary transition cannot be ignored. For many seniors, sweets and comfort foods represent a lifetime of habits and a source of dopamine in a life that may be increasingly devoid of other pleasures. The tea and biscuit culture, or the reliance on soft, easily chewable refined carbohydrates due to dental issues, presents a significant barrier to compliance. However, the science is unequivocal. The consumption of fructose, particularly in the form of high fructose corn syrup found in sweetened beverages and processed foods, bypasses the regulatory steps of glycolysis in the liver. This leads directly to de novo lipogenesis, the creation of new fat, specific in the liver. Fatty liver disease is the silent twin of type 2 diabetes. As the liver fills with fat, it becomes resistant to insulin, perpetuating a vicious cycle where the body produces more insulin to overcome the resistance, which in turn signals the body to store more fat. Breaking this cycle requires a radical restructuring of the palate. It involves retraining the brain to find satisfaction in the savory and the fibrous rather than the sweet. Moreover, the timing of nutrient intake plays a pivotal role. The concept of chrononutrition suggests that the elderly body processes sugar differently depending on the time of day. Insulin sensitivity is naturally higher in the morning and drops significantly in the evening due to circadian rhythms. A bowl of white rice or a slice of cake eaten at dinner inflicts significantly more metabolic damage than the same food eaten at breakfast. Therefore, the healthy low-sugar diet entry is not static, it is dynamic. It requires the front-loading of carbohydrates earlier in the day and a strict embargo on sugars in the evening. This strategy aligns food intake with the body's diminishing hormonal capabilities. The medical community's push for this dietary overhaul is supported by decades of data, yet the food industry's relentless marketing of low-fat products, which are often laden with sugar to compensate for lost flavor, has confused the generation that needs this information the most. Correcting this requires deep education, moving beyond "eat your vegetables" to an explanation of how specific molecules interact with aging cellular receptors. Ultimately, the adoption of a low-sugar, vegetable-rich diet is the foundational bedrock of diabetes prevention. It is a daily, hourly intervention that fundamentally alters the biochemistry of the blood. It reduces systemic inflammation, measured by markers like C-reactive protein, which is chronically elevated in pre-diabetic seniors. It changes the gut microbiome, feeding beneficial bacteria that produce short-chain fatty acids like butyrate, which have been shown to improve the gut barrier and enhance insulin sensitivity. The transition is difficult, requiring the abandonment of lifelong culinary traditions, but the alternative is a gradual descent into the complications of unmanaged glucose, neuropathy, retinopathy, and cardiovascular failure. By treating food as a medical intervention, the elderly can effectively manually override their genetic or age-related predisposition to the disease.
2. The adipose anchor, the criticality of weight maintenance. The second pillar of defense in the war against type 2 diabetes in the elderly is the rigorous maintenance of a healthy weight. However, to view weight merely as a number on a scale is a dangerous oversimplification. In the realm of geriatric endocrinology, body weight, specifically body composition, is a complex metabolic organ. Adipose tissue, or body fat, was once thought to be an inert storage depot for excess energy. Modern science has shattered this misconception, revealing fat to be a highly active endocrine gland that secretes hormones and inflammatory cytokines. For the elderly, the accumulation of fat, particularly visceral fat located deep within the abdominal cavity, acts as a parasitic entity that actively drives the progression of insulin resistance. This is not a cosmetic issue, it is a physiological emergency. When a senior maintains a healthy weight, they are essentially silencing a biological factory that produces disease. The mechanism by which excess weight causes diabetes is rooted in the concept of lipotoxicity. As an individual ages, the subcutaneous fat depots, the fat just under the skin, often lose their capacity to expand and store lipids safely. Consequently, excess energy spills over into visceral depots and ectopic sites, places where fat should never be, such as the liver, the pancreas, and the skeletal muscle. This ectopic fat interferes with insulin signaling pathways. In a healthy weight scenario, insulin binds to a receptor on the cell surface, triggering a cascade of events that brings glucose transporters, GLUT4, to the cell membrane. In an overweight elderly individual, the accumulation of intracellular lipid metabolites, such as diacylglycerol and ceramides, blocks this signal. The doorbell is ringing, but the cell refuses to open the door. By maintaining a healthy weight through portion control and caloric discipline, the elderly patient reduces the lipid burden on these non-adipose tissues, allowing the insulin signaling pathways to function without interference. A critical nuance in this discussion is the phenomenon of sarcopenic obesity. This is a condition unique to the aging population, where an individual may appear to be of normal weight or only slightly overweight according to body mass index, BMI standards, but in reality possesses a dangerous composition of low muscle mass and high visceral fat.
Muscle tissue is the primary consumer of glucose in the body. As seniors age, they naturally lose muscle mass in a process called sarcopenia. If they continue to eat the same amount of calories while losing this metabolically active tissue, the ratio of fat to muscle shifts dramatically. A 75-year-old man with a BMI of 25 is metabolically distinct from a 25-year-old man with the same BMI. The senior likely has significantly less muscle to burn glucose and more visceral fat, producing inflammatory markers like interleukin-6, IL-6, and tumor necrosis factor alpha, TNF-alpha. These cytokines induce a state of chronic low-grade inflammation that desensitizes receptors to insulin. Therefore, maintaining a healthy weight for the elderly involves a dual mandate, preventing fat gain while vigorously protecting muscle mass. The strategy for achieving this balance involves a sophisticated approach to caloric restriction and portion control. The elderly metabolism is slower. The basal metabolic rate, BMR, drops by approximately 2 to 3% per decade after early adulthood. This means a senior requires significantly fewer calories to maintain their weight than they did in middle age. Continuing to consume normal portions essentially guarantees weight gain. The investigative data supports the practice of slight sustained caloric deficits achieved through portion control
rather than drastic crash diets. Rapid weight loss in the elderly is perilous as it often accelerates muscle loss and can lead to frailty and increased mortality. The goal is a slow, methodical reduction in fat mass, achieved by avoiding the caloric density of late-night meals and high-fat foods. The prohibition against late-night eating is particularly salient. Evolution has wired the human body to process energy during daylight hours. Late-night caloric intake forces the body to digest and store energy during a phase when metabolic processes should be winding down, leading to higher postprandial glucose levels and increased fat storage. Furthermore, the psychological and environmental factors contributing to weight gain in the elderly are profound. Retirement often leads to a more sedentary lifestyle, removing the non-exercise activity thermogenesis (NEAT) that came from working, commuting, and daily tasks. Social isolation can lead to emotional eating. Additionally, the thrifty gene hypothesis suggests that humans are evolutionarily adapted to store fat efficiently to survive famine.
In the modern food environment, characterized by an endless abundance of calorie-dense foods, this genetic adaptation becomes a liability. The elderly, often possessing a lifetime of ingrained eating habits, find themselves fighting millions of years of evolutionary programming. Treatment support in this area often involves behavioral cognitive therapy to address the relationship with food, alongside nutritional counseling. The medical consensus indicates that even a modest weight loss of 5 to 7% of total body weight can dramatically improve insulin sensitivity and delay or even prevent the onset of type 2 diabetes. This is not about achieving a thin aesthetic, but about reaching a metabolic sweet spot where the body's insulin demand matches its supply. The intersection of weight management and pharmaceutical intervention also warrants detailed examination. Many medications commonly prescribed to the elderly, beta blockers, corticosteroids, and certain antidepressants, are known to cause weight gain or metabolic disturbances. This iatrogen, doctor-caused obesity, complicates prevention efforts. A vigilant approach to weight maintenance requires a comprehensive review of the patient's medication list to identify and mitigate these side effects. It is a holistic endeavor. Maintaining a healthy weight is the external manifestation of internal order. It signifies that energy intake is balanced with energy expenditure, that the inflammatory fat depots are kept in check, and that the metabolic machinery is running efficiently. In the grand scope of diabetes prevention, weight control is the lever that moves the world. It dictates the hormonal environment of the body. When an elderly person sheds excess visceral fat, the levels of adiponectin, a hormone that increases insulin sensitivity and protects against atherosclerosis, rise significantly. Simultaneously, the levels of resistin and leptin, hormones that can contribute to insulin resistance when dysregulated, normalize. The biochemistry of the body resets. This is why weight management is listed as a primary intervention, often more effective than metformin or other first-line pharmaceutical treatments in early-stage prevention trials. It addresses the root cause, the energy toxicity, rather than just treating the symptom of high blood sugar. For the aging population, managing the waistline is the single most effective physical act of rebellion against the encroaching darkness of chronic disease.
The kinetic imperative, mobilizing the muscular defense. The human body was designed by evolution to function as a perpetual motion machine, yet modern longevity has paradoxically gifted us a sedentary existence that acts as a slow-acting poison. Entry number 3, daily light exercise, is not a suggestion for leisure, it is a prescription for survival. For the elderly population, the skeletal muscle system is the largest metabolic organ in the body, serving as the primary disposal site for approximately 80% of post-meal glucose. When we discuss preventing type 2 diabetes through movement, we are discussing the mechanical activation of cellular gateways that have rusted shut. The tragedy of the aging body is not just the wearing down of parts, but the atrophy of this critical glucose-absorbing tissue, a condition known as sarcopenia. Sarcopenia is the silent accomplice of diabetes. As seniors lose muscle mass due to inactivity, they lose the very storage tanks required to hold glucose. The sugar, having nowhere to go, remains in the bloodstream, wreaking havoc on the vasculature. Therefore, the mandate for daily light exercise is a crusade to preserve muscle function and force the metabolic machinery to turn over. To understand why exercise is non-negotiable, we must look at the molecular level. In a healthy younger body, insulin acts as a key that unlocks the cell to let sugar in. In the pre-diabetic or insulin-resistant elderly body, the lock is jammed. The cell ignores the insulin signal. However, exercise possesses a miraculous, almost redundant fail-safe mechanism. Muscle contraction activates an enzyme called AMP-activated protein kinase, AMPK. When AMPK is triggered by movement, it causes glucose transporters, specifically GLUT4, to migrate to the cell surface independently of insulin. This means that even if an elderly person's pancreas is failing or their insulin receptors are deaf to hormonal signals, the simple act of walking can manually open the doors to the cell and clear sugar from the blood. This creates a backdoor for glucose disposal. It is a biological loophole that allows the diabetic or pre-diabetic physiology to function almost normally, provided the body is kept in motion.
This is why the timing of exercise is as critical as the exercise itself. A 20-minute walk immediately following a meal intercepts the glucose spike before it can reach toxic levels,
flattening the glycemic curve more effectively than many pharmaceutical interventions. The specific recommendation for walking 20 to 30 minutes daily is rooted in the accessibility and evolutionary consistency of the activity. Walking is the fundamental human movement pattern. For the elderly, it provides a low-impact, high-yield metabolic stimulus. It does not require a gym membership or specialized equipment. It requires only gravity and intent. Yet the lightness of this exercise should not be mistaken for ineffectiveness. During a brisk walk, the heart rate elevates, pumping oxygenated blood to the periphery. This increases shear stress on the blood vessel walls, which stimulates the production of nitric oxide. Nitric oxide is a potent vasodilator, relaxing blood vessels and improving circulation. For a diabetic or pre-diabetic senior whose microvasculature is often constricted and damaged by high sugar levels, this is a reparative process. Furthermore, the rhythmic contraction of the calf muscles acts as a second heart, pumping venous blood back up to the thorax, reducing the risk of edema and clots. The psychological barrier to exercise in the elderly, often fear of pain or falling, must be dismantled by understanding that walking strengthens the connective tissues and lubricates the joints through the production of synovial fluid. Immobility breeds stiffness, movement breeds fluidity. Beyond the pedestrian, we must examine the ancient art of Tai Chi as a scientifically validated intervention for diabetes prevention. Often dismissed in Western medicine as mere relaxation, Tai Chi is a sophisticated neuromuscular training regimen. It involves slow, deliberate movements that require sustained isometric contractions of the lower body muscles. Holding a horse stance or shifting weight slowly from one leg to the other engages the large muscle groups of the quadriceps and glutes without the damaging impact forces of running. Studies have shown that Tai Chi significantly lowers hemoglobin HbA1c levels in type 2 diabetes patients. It serves a dual purpose. It burns glucose through muscular engagement and reduces cortisol through meditative focus. Cortisol, the stress hormone, signals the liver to dump glucose into the bloodstream, a fight-or-flight response that is disastrous for a diabetic. By lowering stress, Tai Chi lowers the Base-Daimler-Seger. Additionally, it enhances proprioception, body awareness, and balance,
drastically reducing the fall risk that often sidelines seniors into permanent inactivity. For those whose mobility is severely compromised, chair exercises represent the democratization of metabolic health. The misconception that one must be standing to exercise is a barrier that leads to decline. Seated leg lifts, arm marches, and resistance band work can stimulate the same AMPK pathways as walking. The goal is to elevate the metabolic rate above the resting baseline. Even fidgeting or non-exercise activity thermogenesis, NEAT, plays a role. The cumulative effect of these small movements is profound. It keeps the mitochondrial furnaces burning. Mitochondria are the power plants of the cell, turning sugar into energy. Aging is characterized by mitochondrial dysfunction. The power plants shut down. Exercise stimulates mitochondrial biogenesis, the creation of new power plants. A senior who exercises is literally building a younger, more efficient metabolic engine at the cellular level. The cultural shift required here is massive. We have constructed a society that treats retirement as a time of rest, symbolizing it with the rocking chair. This symbol is lethal. The sedentary death syndrome is a real medical concept. Prolonged sitting shuts down the production of lipoprotein lipase, an enzyme necessary for breaking down fats in the blood. When an elderly person sits for 4 hours straight watching television, their blood becomes a sludge of glucose and triglycerides. The prescription for daily light exercise is a call to break this cycle of stagnation. It is about integrating movement into the fabric of daily life, gardening, cleaning, walking the dog, or simply pacing while on the phone. It is about reclaiming the physicality of existence. Moreover, the impact of exercise extends to the brain, which is a voracious consumer of glucose. High blood sugar is neurotoxic, leading to an increased risk of Alzheimer's disease, now frequently referred to as type 3 diabetes. Exercise produces brain-derived neurotrophic factor, BDNF, a protein that protects neurons and encourages the growth of new synapses. By managing blood sugar through exercise, the elderly are protecting their cognitive faculties. The link between the muscle and the mind is absolute. A body in motion preserves the brain in function. In the future landscape of geriatric care, we may see the rise of exercise mimetics, drugs designed to mimic the chemical effects of exercise. However,
no pill can replicate the systemic cascade of benefits provided by physical movement. The mechanical load on the bones prevents osteoporosis. The deep breathing improves lung capacity. The social aspect of walking groups combats isolation. Exercise is a polypill with zero negative side effects when dosed correctly. The narrative must change from exercise as a chore to exercise as a celebration of remaining capability. It is the defiance of the entropy that seeks to disorder our biology. For the elderly individual standing on the precipice of diabetes, putting one foot in front of the other is the most powerful act of self-preservation available. It is the biological signal that tells the body, we are still here, we are still active, we are still alive.
4. The White Death, the strategic reduction of refined carbohydrates. If sugar is the arsonist, refined carbohydrates are the kindling that allows the fire to consume the house.
Entry number 4, reduce refined carbohydrates, addresses the structural flaw in the modern diet that has made type 2 diabetes a global pandemic among the elderly. We must distinguish clearly between sugar, sweetness, and refined carbohydrates, starch. While they are biochemically similar once digested, their cultural role and consumption patterns are distinct. Refined carbohydrates, white bread, white noodles, pastries, crackers, and white rice form the bulk of the caloric intake for many seniors. They are soft, palatable, inexpensive, and shelf-stable. They are also metabolically disastrous. To prevent diabetes, we must dissect the industrial processing of grains and understand why the whiteness of a food is often a marker of its toxicity. A grain of wheat or rice in its natural state is a perfect nutritional packet. It consists of 3 parts: the bran, the fiber-rich outer shell, the germ, the nutrient-dense core containing fats and vitamins, and the endosperm, the starchy energy reserve. The bran acts as a physical barrier, a fortress wall that digestive enzymes must breach to get to the starch. This process takes time, resulting in a slow, steady release of glucose into the bloodstream. In the late 19th century, with the advent of high-speed steel roller mills, humanity perfected the art of stripping away the bran and the germ, leaving only the pulverized endosperm. This creates white flour. When an elderly person eats white bread, they are eating pre-digested food. The mechanical work has already been done by the factory. Upon entering the mouth, salivary amylase immediately converts the starch into glucose. It hits the bloodstream with the speed of an injection. For an aging pancreas with a delayed insulin response, this rapid influx is unmanageable. The blood sugar spikes to dangerous levels, forcing the body to scramble for a solution, often resulting in the conversion of that sugar into visceral fat. The specific danger of refined carbohydrates lies in their glycemic load. While a food might not taste sweet, its capacity to raise blood sugar can be higher than table sugar. A bowl of soft, overcooked white pasta has a massive surface area available for enzymatic attack. The process of cooking gelatinizes the starches,
swelling the granules and making them even more accessible to digestion. For the elderly, whose gut motility may be slower, these foods are absorbed efficiently and rapidly. This causes a phenomenon known as reactive hypoglycemia. The blood sugar spikes, the pancreas eventually releases a massive panicked dose of insulin if it still can, and the blood sugar crashes. This crash triggers hunger, cravings, and confusion, leading the senior to reach for more refined carbohydrates to bring their energy back up. It is a roller coaster of metabolic instability that exhausts the endocrine system. The cultural attachment to these foods is deep-seated. For many in the current geriatric generation, white bread and white rice were once symbols of affluence and purity, while dark coarse grains were associated with poverty. Furthermore, dental issues, dentures, missing teeth, or gum disease make soft processed foods appealing. It is easier to chew a biscuit than a bowl of steel-cut oats. Nursing homes and assisted living facilities often rely on these foods because they are cheap and generally accepted by residents. This creates a beige diet that accelerates decline. The intervention required is a return to the complex, the rough, and the whole. The shift to whole grains is not merely about fiber content, it is about the food matrix. In whole grain bread, brown rice, or quinoa, the starch is trapped within a network of fiber and protein. This matrix acts as a physical brake on digestion. It survives the stomach and small intestine largely intact, traveling to the colon. Here, it feeds the gut microbiome. The bacteria ferment these fibers, producing short-chain fatty acids like butyrate and propionate. These molecules are signaling agents that travel to the liver and muscles to improve insulin sensitivity. By stripping the grain, we starve these beneficial bacteria and encourage the growth of species that thrive on simple sugars, which are linked to increased systemic inflammation. Therefore, choosing whole grains is a strategy for colonic rescue, enlisting the trillions of bacteria in the gut to help fight diabetes. However, the whole grain label is often a marketing mirage. Many products labeled whole wheat are simply white flour with a dusting of bran added back in, or they are pulverized so finely that they digest just as quickly as white flour. The investigative consumer must look for intact grains.
This means seeing the actual kernel or seed. For the elderly, this transition can be culinary shock therapy. Brown rice has a nuttier flavor and a chewier texture. Whole grain pasta is firmer. The strategy for application involves gradual integration, mixing white and brown rice or using 50% whole wheat flour in baking to acclimate the palate and the digestive system. We must also address the specific villains of the snack aisle: crackers, pretzels, and savory pastries. These are often perceived as safe because they are not candy. In reality, they are dense sorts of refined starch, often coated in salt and poor quality fats. They provide a crunch that is satisfying but devoid of nutritional value. For a senior watching television, it is easy to consume 500 calories of crackers, equivalent to a meal, without triggering the satiety hormones that a protein or fiber-rich meal would release. This invisible caloric density contributes significantly to the visceral fat accumulation discussed in previous entries. The replacement strategy involves finding crunch in vegetables or nuts, foods that bring their own satiety signals. The biochemical implications of a high-refined carb diet extend to the liver. When the liver is flooded with glucose from rapid starch digestion and its glycogen stores are full, which is common in sedentary seniors, it engages in de novo lipogenesis. It turns sugar into fat. This fat is packaged into very low-density lipoproteins, VLDL, and sent into the blood, raising triglyceride levels. High triglycerides are a hallmark of the metabolic syndrome that precedes diabetes. By reducing refined carbohydrates, we lower the production of VLDL, clearing the bloodstream of these dangerous fats. It is a vascular cleanup operation. Further, we must consider the second meal effect. What an elderly person eats for breakfast dictates how their body handles lunch. A breakfast rich in whole grains and low in refined carbohydrates primes the body to handle glucose better throughout the day. Conversely, a breakfast of toast and jam sets a precedent of high insulin demand that the body struggles to recover from. The metabolic memory of the morning meal lingers. By eliminating the morning spike, we protect the entire day's glycemic stability. The reduction of refined carbohydrates is also a defense against the advanced glycation end products, AGEs, mentioned earlier.
The browning of a crust on white bread is the Maillard reaction, delicious in the oven, destructive in the body. The high heat processing of starchy foods generates dietary AGEs, which add to the body's inflammatory burden. Steaming, boiling, or stewing whole grains is a safer cooking method than baking or frying refined flours. In the grand analysis, the reliance on refined carbohydrates is a modern anomaly that the ancient human genome cannot handle. For the elderly, whose physiological margin for error is razor thin, these foods are not sustenance, they are stress. The transition away from them is a transition toward foods that look like they came from the earth, not a factory. It is a rejection of the convenience that kills. By choosing the intact grain, the rough oat, and the complex carbohydrate, the elderly individual forces their digestive system to work as it was intended, slowly, methodically, and healthily. This slows the entry of fuel into the blood, matching the supply to the diminished demand of the aging body, and maintaining the delicate equilibrium required to keep diabetes at bay. It is a return to the slow food philosophy, not as a gourmet trend, but as a medical necessity.
5. The internal matrix, the architectural defense of fiber. In the modern culinary landscape, fiber has been tragically rebranded as a mere digestive aid, a utilitarian substance relegated to the dusty shelves of geriatric care in the form of powdered supplements. This reductionist view serves as a lethal blind spot in the fight against type 2 diabetes. Entry number 5, increase fiber intake, is not simply about regularity. It is about constructing a complex bioarchitectural defense system within the gut that physically and chemically manipulates the absorption of energy. For the elderly, whose metabolic flexibility has waned, dietary fiber acts as the primary modulator of the glycemic response. It is the difference between a flood and a controlled irradiation. When we investigate the mechanics of fiber, particularly soluble fiber found in oats, beans, and lentils, we discover a substance that defies the standard definition of food. It is not fuel to be burned, but a functional tool that alters the physics of digestion. The mechanism by which fiber prevents diabetes is rooted in viscosity. When soluble fiber enters the aqueous environment of the stomach and small intestine, it hydrates and swells, forming a thick, gel-like matrix. This is not a passive sludge, it is an active barrier. This viscous gel encapsulates food particles, trapping starch and sugar molecules within its lattice structure. As the chyme, digested food, moves into the small intestine where glucose absorption occurs, the digestive enzymes must work significantly harder to penetrate this fiber mesh to reach the starch. This physical impediment drastically slows down the rate of hydrolysis. Instead of a rapid spike in blood glucose, which would demand a frantic insulin response from the aging pancreas, the sugar is released into the bloodstream in a slow, manageable trickle. This time-release effect is arguably more potent than many pharmacological interventions designed to blunt postprandial spikes. For an elderly individual, eating a high-fiber meal is the equivalent of placing a governor on an engine, preventing it from revving into the white zone of hyperglycemia. However, the story of fiber extends far beyond the upper digestive tract. The true alchemy occurs in the colon, a dark, anaerobic ecosystem inhabited by trillions of bacteria. This is where the prevention of diabetes moves from mechanics to biochemistry.
Human enzymes cannot digest fiber. We lack the machinery to break down these complex carbohydrate chains, but our gut microbiome thrives on them. When an elderly person consumes prebiotic fibers found in onions, garlic, leeks, asparagus, and leafy greens, they are feeding the beneficial bacteria species such as bifidobacteria and lactobacilli. These bacteria ferment the fiber, and the byproduct of this fermentation is short-chain fatty acids, SFAs, specifically acetate, propionate, and butyrate. Butyrate is a miracle molecule in the context of metabolic health. It strengthens the gut barrier, preventing leaky gut syndrome, where inflammatory toxins seep into the bloodstream and trigger systemic insulin resistance. Even more critically, the fermentation of fiber triggers the release of gut hormones, most notably glucagon-like peptide 1, GLP-1. This is the exact same hormone mimicked by the current blockbuster class of weight loss and diabetes drugs, semaglutide. By eating a high-fiber diet, the elderly are essentially stimulating their body's own internal pharmacy to produce natural GLP-1. This hormone travels to the pancreas to boost insulin secretion in a glucose-dependent manner, travels to the brain to signal satiety, and slows down gastric emptying. Thus, a bowl of lentil soup is not just a meal, it
It is a hormonal trigger that aligns the metabolic systems of the body. The tragedy is that the modern industrial diet has systematically removed fiber to extend shelf life, creating a fiber gap of catastrophic proportions. The average senior consumes less than half of the recommended daily intake, starving their microbiome and leaving their blood sugar unregulated. The application of this entry requires a strategic culinary shift. It is not enough to sprinkle bran on sugary cereal. The goal is to consume intact cellular carbohydrates. The cell walls of plants, the leafy greens, the skins of beans, act as physical cages for the sugar inside. When an elderly person eats whole oats, steel cut or rolled, rather than instant oatmeal, they are eating the cage. The body has to break the cage to get the prize. This energy expenditure during digestion is known as the thermic effect of food, and it is significantly higher for high-fiber foods. Furthermore, the consumption of leafy greens, spinach, kale, chard, provides magnesium, a mineral in which many diabetics are deficient. Magnesium is a cofactor for the insulin receptor. Without it,
The key doesn't turn the lock. We must also address the specific challenges the elderly face in increasing fiber. The geriatric gut is often slower, and a sudden influx of fiber can cause bloating and discomfort, leading to non-compliance. The protocol demands a titration approach, gradually increasing intake over weeks to allow the microbiome to adapt. Crucially, fiber acts as a sponge. Without adequate hydration, it turns into concrete. The mandate to increase fiber must be paired with a mandate to increase water. For seniors with a diminished thirst drive, this is a dangerous oversight. The interplay between fiber and hydration is the lubricant of metabolic health. Historically, human beings evolved on diets containing upwards of 100 grams of fiber a day. Today, we struggle to get 15. This evolutionary mismatch is a primary driver of the diabetes epidemic. The body expects a slow, difficult extraction of energy. We give it liquid sugar and refined dust. By returning to a diet rich in legumes, pulses, and roughage, we are honoring our genetic programming. The humble bean, cheap, shelf-stable, and fiber-dense, is perhaps the most undervalued superfood in the geriatric pantry. It contains resistant starch, a type of fiber that resists digestion entirely in the small intestine, functioning solely to feed the gut bacteria. Studies consistently show that legume consumption is inversely correlated with diabetes risk. In the future of personalized medicine, we may see fiber prescriptions based on an individual's specific microbiome composition. Until then, the broad recommendation stands as a pillar of prevention. Fiber is the great equalizer. It blunts the impact of sugar, it feeds the guardians of the gut, and signals the brain to stop eating. For the elderly, whose internal regulatory systems are fraying, fiber provides the structural support necessary to keep the metabolic house standing. It is the unsung hero of the dinner plate, a complex carbohydrate that fights the consequences of simple sugars.
6. The vascular syndicate, dismantling the triad of pressure, lipids, and sugar. To treat type 2 diabetes as an isolated disorder of blood sugar is a fatal error in medical logic. Diabetes never travels alone. It moves as part of a ruthless syndicate known as metabolic syndrome, accompanied by its enforcers, hypertension, high blood pressure, and dyslipidemia, abnormal cholesterol. Entry number 6, control blood pressure and cholesterol, is an acknowledgement that the vascular system is the primary battleground where diabetes inflicts its most irreversible damage. For the elderly, the risk is not just high sugar, it is the synergistic destruction caused when high sugar meets high pressure and bad fats. Preventing diabetes, therefore, requires a holistic defense of the endothelial lining, the delicate inner skin of the blood vessels. When this lining remains smooth and flexible, diabetes struggles to take hold. When it is damaged by pressure and plaque, the path to metabolic ruin is paved. The relationship between insulin resistance and blood pressure is bidirectional and insidious. High levels of insulin, which circulate in the blood of pre-diabetic seniors, signal the kidneys to retain sodium. This sodium retention draws water into the bloodstream, increasing blood volume and consequently pressure. Simultaneously, insulin resistance impairs the body's ability to produce nitric oxide, the molecule responsible for relaxing blood vessels. The result is a stiff, constricted vascular tree. When high blood pressure, hypertension, hammers against the delicate capillaries of the eyes, kidneys, and extremities, it creates microtears. If the blood is also rich in glucose, that sugar acts like a corrosive agent, preventing these tears from healing properly and forming scar tissue. This is the mechanism of diabetic complications: blindness, kidney failure, amputation. Controlling blood pressure is therefore a preemptive strike against the structural degradation of the body. The dietary intervention for blood pressure control centers on the reduction of sodium and the elimination of fried foods, but the nuance lies in the why. The elderly vasculature is naturally stiffer due to the loss of elastin over decades. This makes seniors salt sensitive. A salty meal that a 20-year-old could handle with ease will send an 80-year-old's blood pressure soaring. The apply-by instruction to eat less salt is a directive to decompress the system.
It involves a radical rejection of processed foods, which hide 75% of the average person's sodium intake. It means returning to the use of herbs, spices, and acids like lemon juice and vinegar to flavor food, strategies that have the added benefit of providing antioxidants. Then we must confront the lipid profile, cholesterol. The popular narrative of good versus bad cholesterol is insufficient for understanding the diabetic risk. We must focus on triglycerides and VLDL, very low-density lipoprotein.
In the context of diabetes prevention, triglycerides are the smoking gun. They represent excess energy, sugar, and carbohydrates that has been converted into fat by the liver. When an elderly person has high triglycerides and low HDL, the good cholesterol, it is a near certain marker of insulin resistance. This specific lipid profile is atherogenic. It promotes the formation of plaques in the arteries. These plaques are not stable. In a diabetic environment, they are prone to rupture, leading to heart attacks and strokes. This is why cardiovascular disease is the leading cause of death for diabetics. The prevention of diabetes is inextricably linked to the preservation of heart health. The instruction to avoid fried foods is scientifically critical because of the nature of the fats involved. Industrial seed oils used in frying, when heated to high temperatures, oxidize and form trans fats and aldehydes. These are inflammatory grenades. When ingested, they trigger systemic inflammation, which further sensitizes insulin receptors. The cell membrane is made of fat, the phospholipid bilayer. If an elderly person builds their cell membranes out of oxidized, rigid trans fats from fried chicken and donuts, the insulin receptors embedded in that membrane cannot function. They become stiff and unresponsive. By replacing these toxic fats with healthy fluid fats from olive oil, avocados, and nuts, we literally rebuild the cell membrane to be more receptive to insulin. This is membrane engineering through diet. Monitoring is the tactical edge of this entry. High blood pressure and high cholesterol are silent killers. They have no symptoms until the catastrophic event. For the elderly, the white coat syndrome, where BP spikes at the doctor's office due to anxiety, can lead to misdiagnosis. The recommendation to monitor BP regularly at home provides a true picture of the vascular load.
It empowers the senior to see the direct correlation between a salty ham dinner and the hypertensive spike the next morning. This biofeedback is a powerful tool for behavioral change. We must also consider the role of the kidney, the organ caught in the crossfire of this triad. The kidney is a filter composed of millions of tiny vessels. Hypertension forces blood through these filters at destructive pressures, while high sugar gums them up. Protecting the kidney by controlling BP is essential for long-term survival. The DASH diet, Dietary Approaches to Stop Hypertension, mentioned in entry number 1, is the gold standard here, proving that food is medicine. It is rich in potassium, calcium, and magnesium, electrolytes that naturally lower blood pressure by counteracting sodium. The pharmaceutical aspect cannot be ignored. For many elderly patients, lifestyle changes alone may not suffice to combat decades of stiffening arteries. The use of ACE inhibitors or ARBs, blood pressure medications, and statins, cholesterol medications, acts as a support system. Interestingly, some blood pressure medications have been shown to delay the onset of diabetes by improving blood flow to the pancreas and muscles. The integration of medical management with lifestyle change is the pragmatic approach. It is not a failure to take medication, it is a strategic fortification. Culturally, we are fighting against the salt tooth and the love of the deep fryer. Fried foods are often comfort foods, deeply ingrained in social gatherings. Breaking this addiction requires an understanding of the stakes. We are not just trying to lower a number on a chart, we are trying to prevent the stroke that steals speech, the heart attack that steals breath, and the vascular dementia that steals the mind. The brain is a vascular organ. It relies on a pristine network of blood vessels to deliver oxygen and glucose. Uncontrolled BP and cholesterol lead to small vessel disease in the brain, a precursor to cognitive decline. In the grand scope of preventative medicine, entry number 6 serves as the perimeter defense. If we can keep the pipes clean and the pressure low, the metabolic machinery can tolerate minor fluctuations in sugar. But if the vascular system is compromised, the body loses its resilience. The control of blood pressure and cholesterol is the maintenance of the highway system upon which all other nutrients and hormones travel. Without it, the delivery of insulin is hampered.
The clearance of toxins is stalled, and the progression to type 2 diabetes accelerates into a cascading system failure. By vigilantly managing these two factors, the elderly individual buys themselves the most precious commodity of all, time. Time for the diet to work, time for the exercise to build muscle, and time to live free from the shackles of chronic disease.
7. The Nocturnal Clinic, Restoring Metabolic Architecture Through Sleep. In the relentless pursuit of health, society has culturally devalued sleep, viewing it as a passive void of inactivity, a suspension of life that interferes with productivity. This perspective is a catastrophic biological error, particularly when examining the genesis of type 2 diabetes in the elderly. Entry number 7, Get Adequate Sleep, posits that the bedroom is not merely a place of rest, but a highly active metabolic clinic where the body attempts to repair the damage of the waking hours. Sleep is the foundational rhythm upon which the endocrine system dances. When this rhythm is disrupted, the music stops and the metabolic chaos begins. For the aging population, the fragmentation of sleep architecture is not just a nuisance, it is a direct physiological cause of insulin resistance. To understand this, we must investigate the profound hormonal heist that occurs during the dark hours, a silent robbery of health that leaves the body in a pre-diabetic state before breakfast is even served.
The science linking sleep deprivation to diabetes is absolute and terrifying. Seminal research from the University of Chicago demonstrated that when healthy young individuals were restricted to 4 hours of sleep for just a few nights, their ability to process glucose dropped by 40%, essentially rendering them temporarily diabetic. If this is the result in the prime of youth, the implications for the elderly, whose beta cell function is already compromised, are dire. The mechanism centers on the interplay between the circadian clock, located in the suprachiasmatic nucleus of the brain, and peripheral clocks found in the liver, pancreas, and muscle tissue. These clocks regulate the sensitivity of insulin receptors. During deep slow-wave sleep, SWS, the brain reduces its demand for glucose, and the sympathetic nervous system, the fight-or-flight system, powers down. This downregulation lowers cortisol levels and allows the parasympathetic nervous system to take over, facilitating glucose storage and cellular repair. As we age, the ability to generate SWS naturally diminishes. The elderly often spend more time in lighter stages of sleep, experiencing frequent awakenings known as microarousals. These interruptions prevent the sympathetic nervous system from fully resting, keeping the body in a state of low-grade nocturnal alertness. Consequently, cortisol remains elevated throughout the night, signaling the liver to pump glucose into the bloodstream at the exact moment the body should be fasting. Furthermore, we must examine the hormonal axis of hunger, leptin and ghrelin. Leptin is the hormone of satiety, signaling the brain that energy stores are sufficient. Ghrelin is the hormone of hunger. Adequate sleep boosts leptin and suppresses ghrelin. Sleep deprivation flips this switch with cruel efficiency. An elderly person who sleeps poorly wakes up with suppressed leptin and elevated ghrelin. Their brain is chemically screaming for energy, specifically in the form of simple carbohydrates and sugars. This is not a failure of willpower, it is a neurochemical command. The tired brain seeks a quick dopamine and glucose hit to stay awake. Thus, poor sleep drives the very dietary choices that lead to diabetes. It creates a vicious cycle. The senior eats sugar to combat fatigue, the sugar causes a crash, the crash leads to a nap that disrupts the next night's sleep, and the metabolic derangement deepens. The modern environment has introduced a new toxic variable, blue light. The human endocrine system evolved to synchronize with the sun. As darkness falls, the pineal gland secretes melatonin, the hormone that ushers in sleep. However, melatonin does more than induce drowsiness. Recent research suggests it plays a role in insulin secretion regulation. The apply by instruction to avoid screens before bed is a defense against the spectrum of light emitted by televisions, tablets, and smartphones. This blue wavelength light hits the retina and signals the suprachiasmatic nucleus that it is still high noon. The production of melatonin is instantly suppressed. For the elderly, whose melatonin production is already naturally lower due to calcification of the pineal gland, this artificial light is a metabolic disruptor of the highest order. It shifts the circadian phase, dysynchronizing the brain from the pancreas. The organ expects to rest, but the light tells it to work. This social jet lag is a significant contributor to glucose intolerance. We must also confront the silent epidemic of obstructive sleep apnea, or OSA, in the geriatric population. Due to the loss of muscle tone in the throat and the accumulation of visceral fat, the airway collapses during sleep, causing breathing to stop repeatedly, sometimes hundreds of times a night. Each pause in breathing causes a drop in blood oxygen, hypoxia, triggering a violent panic response from the brain. Adrenaline surges, blood pressure spikes, and the liver dumps sugar into the blood to fuel the emergency. This happens while the person is unconscious. A senior with untreated sleep apnea is essentially running a marathon of stress all night long. The connection is so strong that many endocrinologists now view sleep apnea and type 2 diabetes as two sides of the same coin. Treatment support often involves the use of CPAP, continuous positive airway pressure machines. Studies have shown that treating apnea can improve insulin sensitivity as effectively as some oral diabetes medications. It is a mechanical fix for a metabolic problem. The cultural narrative surrounding sleep and aging requires a rewrite. There is a myth that old people need less sleep. This is false. They may get less sleep due to pain, nocturia, the need to urinate at night, or medication side effects, but their biological requirement for 7 to 8 hours remains constant for optimal metabolic health. The fragmentation of sleep is often accepted as an inevitable part of aging, rather than a treatable condition. This fatalism is dangerous. Interventions such as cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, CBTI, are proving to be powerful tools. By retraining the brain to associate the bed with sleep rather than wakefulness and worry, seniors can consolidate their rest. Moreover, the timing of sleep, chronotype, matters. Seniors often experience a phase advance, feeling sleepy earlier in the evening and waking up at 4 a.m. While natural, fighting this rhythm or napping excessively during the day dilutes the sleep pressure needed for the night. The goal is to build a robust drive for sleep through daytime activity and light exposure. Morning sunlight is the anchor. Exposure to bright light early in the day helps set the circadian clock, ensuring that melatonin is released at the correct time in the evening. This phototherapy is a potent drug-free intervention for stabilizing blood sugar. The philosophical implication here is that rest is an act of resistance against entropy. During deep sleep, the brain also activates the glymphatic system, a plumbing system that washes away neurotoxins, including beta-amyloid plaques associated with Alzheimer's. Given the link between type 3 diabetes, Alzheimer's, and insulin resistance, sleep becomes the guardian of both the mind and the metabolism. By prioritizing sleep hygiene, cooling the room,
Darkening the windows, silencing the noise, the elderly are protecting the delicate machinery of their insulin receptors. They are allowing the beta cells of the pancreas to regenerate. They are lowering the systemic inflammation that drives disease. In the final analysis, entry number 7 is about respecting the biological night. It is about understanding that we cannot cheat physiology. The all-nighter or the chronic insomnia of the elderly is not just a fatigue issue, it is a metabolic emergency. Good sleep improves insulin function by allowing the body to reset its hormonal baseline. It clears the slate. Without it, the other 9 entries on this list struggle to gain traction. You can eat the perfect diet and exercise daily, but if you are sleeping 4 hours a night, your cortisol will be high, your insulin will be resistant, and your blood sugar will be unstable. Sleep is the bedrock. It is the silent healer that works while we are unaware, stitching together the frayed edges of our metabolic health.
8. The external saboteur, the biochemistry of stress management. If sugar is the external enemy we ingest, stress is the internal saboteur we generate. Entry number 8, Manage Stress Effectively, addresses the profound and often overlooked impact of the mind-body connection on blood glucose regulation. For the elderly, the landscape of stress has shifted from the acute pressures of career and child-rearing to the chronic, gnawing anxieties of health decline, loss of independence, financial insecurity, and grief. This is not merely a psychological burden, it is a biochemical hazard. The human body possesses an ancient survival mechanism known as the HPA axis, hypothalamus-pituitary-adrenal. When perceived threats arise, this system floods the body with cortisol and epinephrine, adrenaline. In the context of our ancestors, this was designed to fuel a sprint away from a predator. In the context of a modern senior sitting in a chair worrying about a diagnosis, it is a metabolic disaster. The prevention of type 2 diabetes requires us to dismantle this chronic stress response and manually engage the body's rest and digest system. To understand the lethality of stress, we must look at the liver. The liver is the body's fuel tank, storing glucose in the form of glycogen. When the brain perceives stress, it signals the adrenal glands to release epinephrine. This hormone travels to the liver and unlocks the tank, triggering a process called glycogenolysis, the rapid breakdown of glycogen into glucose. Simultaneously, cortisol triggers gluconeogenesis, the creation of new glucose from protein and fat. The biological intent is to provide high-octane fuel for the muscles to fight or flee. But the elderly individual is not fighting a tiger, they are fighting loneliness or bureaucracy. They remain sedentary. The massive surge of glucose has nowhere to go. It circulates in the blood, damaging vessels and nerves. To make matters worse, cortisol actively induces insulin resistance in the skeletal muscles. It effectively boards up the windows of the cells saying, "Save the sugar for the brain, we are in a crisis." This evolutionary adaptation creates the perfect storm for hyperglycemia, increased sugar production coupled with decreased sugar uptake. The concept of allostatic load is critical here. This refers to the cumulative wear and tear on the body that accumulates as an individual is exposed to repeated or chronic stress. For the elderly,
The allostatic load is often at its peak. The apply by instruction to practice deep breathing or meditation is not new age fluff. It is a physiological override switch. The vagus nerve is the longest cranial nerve in the body, wandering from the brainstem down to the heart, lungs, and digestive tract. It is the superhighway of the parasympathetic nervous system. When a person engages in slow, diaphragmatic breathing, specifically where the exhale is longer than the inhale, they are mechanically stimulating the vagus nerve. This sends a signal to the brain to lower the heart rate, reduce blood pressure, and crucially, shut off the cortisol drip. By lowering cortisol, we stop the liver from dumping sugar. We reopen the muscle cells to insulin. We are manually driving the metabolism out of the danger zone. The connection between stress and visceral fat is also undeniable. Cortisol has a specific affinity for fat storage in the abdominal region. It encourages the differentiation of adipocytes, fat cells, in the belly, leading to the stress belly often seen in seniors who may otherwise have thin limbs. As discussed in entry number 2, this visceral fat is an inflammatory organ that drives diabetes. Therefore, stress management is also weight management. By controlling the anxiety, we control the central adiposity that strangles the organs. We must also investigate the role of psychosocial stress. Loneliness is a potent stressor, biologically equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. The elderly are statistically the most isolated demographic. This isolation keeps the body in a state of hypervigilance. The brain scans the environment for threats because there is no tribe to protect it. This constant background hum of anxiety keeps blood sugar chronically elevated. Community engagement, social clubs, or even the companionship of a pet can act as metabolic buffers. The oxytocin released during social bonding or petting a dog opposes the effects of cortisol. It is a hormonal antidote. The instruction to manage stress is therefore also a call to reconnect with humanity. Meditation and mindfulness-based stress reduction, MBSR, have moved from the ashram to the clinic. Clinical trials have shown that regular mindfulness practice can lower HbA1c levels in diabetics as effectively as some medications. It works by increasing the individual's awareness of the stress response before it cascades into a sugar spike. Instead of reacting unconsciously to a stressor,
The mindful senior notices the tightening of the chest, the racing thoughts, and chooses a relaxation response. This gap between stimulus and response is where metabolic health is preserved. Gentle stretching and yoga function similarly. They release tension from the muscles, which signals back to the brain that the body is safe. If the muscles are loose, the brain assumes the tiger is gone. The historical context is fascinating. We are living with Stone Age hardware in a space-age world. Our stress response was designed for acute, short-term physical threats. Today, the threats are psychological, chronic, and unrelenting. The news cycle, with its 24-hour stream of global catastrophe, is a source of vicarious trauma for many empathy-prone seniors. The visual input of disaster triggers the HPA axis, just as if the danger were local. Information dieting, limiting exposure to distressing news, is a valid medical intervention for blood sugar control. Furthermore, we must address the Type A personality aging into retirement. The loss of professional identity can be a massive stressor. The drive to achieve doesn't disappear, it just loses its outlet, turning inward as frustration. Repurposing this drive into hobbies, volunteering, or mentorship provides a sense of purpose. Purpose is protective. Studies on blue zones, areas where people live the longest, consistently cite a strong sense of purpose, or ikigai in Japan, as a factor in longevity and low diabetes rates. A person with a reason to get up in the morning has a more regulated cortisol rhythm than one who wakes up to avoid. The treatment support note regarding stress control preventing sudden glucose spikes is literal. Emotional shock can send blood sugars soaring into the 300s or 400s milligrams per deciliter in a diabetic patient. This is known as stress hyperglycemia. For the pre-diabetic elderly, these spikes are the hammer blows that finally break the pancreas. By learning to modulate the emotional response, the senior is protecting their remaining beta cells. Ultimately, managing stress is about reclaiming agency over one's own physiology. It is the realization that the mind and the metabolism are not separate entities. Every thought releases a chemical cascade. A worry releases cortisol. A moment of gratitude releases dopamine and serotonin. The fight against type 2 diabetes is won not just in the kitchen or the gym, but in the quiet moments of the mind.
It requires a conscious decision to de-escalate, to breathe, and to prioritize peace. For the elderly, whose physiological reserves are lower, the cost of stress is too high to pay. Calmness is not a luxury, it is a rigorous medical necessity for the preservation of life. By mastering the internal environment, we deny diabetes the chaotic atmosphere it needs to thrive.
9. The chemical sabotage, purging the toxins of tobacco and alcohol. The 9th entry in this comprehensive protocol, Limit Alcohol and Quit Smoking, demands a confrontation with the most socially ingrained yet metabolically destructive habits of the modern era. While dietary adjustments and exercise are additive measures, bringing positive elements into the system, this entry is subtractive. It is the removal of active poisons that systematically dismantled the body's ability to regulate sugar. For the elderly population, the margin for metabolic error is non-existent. The resilience of youth, which once allowed the body to buffer the toxic effects of a cigarette or a stiff drink, has evaporated. To continue these habits into the geriatric years is not merely a vice, it is an act of chemical warfare against one's own endocrine system. We must strip away the romanticism associated with the nightcap or the relaxing smoke and view these substances through the cold, hard lens of molecular biochemistry. Let us first dissect the pathology of smoking. The link between tobacco use and lung cancer is universally understood, yet the connection between smoking and type 2 diabetes is arguably just as strong, though far less publicized. Smoking is a direct cause of insulin resistance. The primary culprit is nicotine, a potent alkaloid that acts as a stimulant. When an elderly person inhales cigarette smoke, nicotine binds to receptors in the brain, triggering the release of catecholamines, specifically epinephrine and norepinephrine. These are stress hormones. As we established in the entry on stress management, these hormones signal the body to mobilize energy for a fight-or-flight response. They inhibit insulin release from the pancreas and stimulate the liver to dump stored glucose into the bloodstream. Therefore, every cigarette is a mini stress event, a chemical spike that forces blood sugar upward. For a senior with prediabetes, smoking essentially keeps the throttle of glucose production pinned to the floor while simultaneously cutting the brake lines of insulin sensitivity. However, the damage goes deeper than hormonal signaling. Cigarette smoke contains over 7,000 chemicals, including heavy metals like cadmium and arsenic. Investigative toxicology reveals that these metals accumulate in the pancreas. Cadmium, in particular, has been shown to disturb the function of beta cells, the very cells responsible for producing insulin. Over decades of smoking,
the elderly pancreas becomes a toxic waste site, its functional capacity eroded not just by age, but by chemical attrition. Furthermore, smoking induces a state of chronic systemic inflammation. It increases the levels of white blood cells and inflammatory markers like C-reactive protein. This inflammation targets the endothelial lining of the blood vessels, making them sticky and prone to plaque buildup. Since diabetes is fundamentally a disease of the blood vessels, smoking accelerates the vascular destruction that high sugar initiates. The smoker's paradox is also a critical concept here. Smokers often have a lower body mass index, BMI, than non-smokers, yet they have a significantly higher risk of diabetes. This is because smoking promotes central adiposity, the accumulation of dangerous visceral fat around the organs. Even if the person appears thin. This hidden fat is the metabolic engine of insulin resistance. The argument often heard from the geriatric demographic is one of fatalism. I've smoked for 50 years, the damage is done, so why quit now? Science refutes this nihilism. The human body possesses an extraordinary capacity for repair, even in advanced age. Within hours of quitting, carbon monoxide levels in the blood drop, allowing oxygen to reach tissues more efficiently. Within weeks, circulation improves. Within a year, the risk of heart disease, the primary killer of diabetics, drops dramatically. For the elderly, quitting smoking is the single most effective way to improve circulation to the extremities. Diabetes threatens the feet and eyes through microvascular damage. Smoking constricts these same vessels. Quitting reopens the supply lines, allowing the immune system to reach infections and wounds, thereby preventing the gangrene and amputations that haunt the diabetic prognosis. We must then turn our investigative gaze to alcohol. The relationship between alcohol and diabetes is complex, often described as a U-shaped curve, where moderate intake shows some benefit, but heavy intake is catastrophic. However, for the elderly, the risks heavily outweigh the theoretical benefits. The liver is the central processing unit for metabolism. It is responsible for maintaining steady blood sugar levels between meals, gluconeogenesis. However, the liver views alcohol as a poison that must be neutralized immediately. When an elderly person consumes alcohol, the liver drops everything else to metabolize the ethanol.
It stops releasing glucose into the blood. If this happens to a senior who is taking diabetes medication or insulin, or even just one with a fragile metabolism, the result can be severe hypoglycemia, dangerously low blood sugar. This crash can lead to dizziness, falls, and confusion, often mistaken for dementia or intoxication. Conversely, chronic heavy drinking destroys the pancreas. Alcohol is a direct toxin to pancreatic acinar cells. Over time, this leads to chronic pancreatitis, a condition where the organ becomes inflamed and scarred. As the fibrosis spreads, it obliterates the islets of Langerhans, the clusters of cells that make insulin. This is pancreagenic diabetes, a form of the disease caused entirely by external damage. Furthermore, alcoholic beverages are often liquid sugar bombs. Beer, sweet wines, and mixers are laden with rapidly absorbing carbohydrates. These empty calories contribute to weight gain, specifically fueling the liver fat, steatosis, that drives insulin resistance. The beer belly is a visible sign of a liver drowning in visceral fat. There is also the neurological dimension. Long-term alcohol use depletes the body of essential nutrients, specifically thiamine, vitamin B1. A deficiency in thiamine leads to neuropathy, nerve damage. Diabetic neuropathy is one of the most painful and debilitating complications of the disease. An elderly drinker who develops diabetes is attacking their nervous system from two sides. The sugar is stripping the myelin sheath from the nerves, and the alcohol is starving the nerves of nutrition. The result is a rapid acceleration of pain, numbness, and loss of mobility. Culturally, the cocktail hour is a sacred ritual for many in the old datus. Breaking this habit requires a psychological shift. It involves understanding that alcohol disrupts sleep architecture, entry number 7, preventing the deep restorative phases where glucose regulation is reset. It involves recognizing that alcohol lowers inhibitions, leading to poor dietary choices, entry number 1, the drunkies, where one consumes refined carbs after drinking. The strategy for limitation involves substitution, replacing the ritual of the drink with non-alcoholic alternatives that provide the sensory experience without the metabolic tax. The synthesis of these two prohibitions forms a firewall. By quitting smoking and limiting alcohol,
the elderly individual removes the chemical static that interferes with the body's signals. They lower their inflammatory burden. They protect their liver and pancreas, the twin guardians of blood sugar. It is a purification process. In a world full of additives and pollutants, the voluntary ingestion of toxins is a luxury the aging body can no longer afford. The reclamation of health begins with the refusal to poison oneself. It is an act of dignity and self-preservation, ensuring that the final chapters of life are defined by vitality rather than the slow, suffocating decline of metabolic failure.
10. The surveillance state, the absolute necessity of regular health checkups. The final entry in this decalogue of prevention is the overarching strategy that binds all others together, regular health checkups. If the previous 9 entries are the weapons of war, this entry is the intelligence network. Without data, the battle against type 2 diabetes is fought blind. Diabetes is notoriously insidious. It is often called the silent killer because it can ravage the body for a decade before the first symptom appears. By the time an elderly person feels thirsty, tired, or notices blurred vision, roughly 50% of their beta cell function may already be irretrievably lost. Therefore, the shift from reactive medicine, treating the symptom, to predictive medicine, identifying the trend, is the cornerstone of survival. Regular checkups are not merely administrative obligations, they are the audits of our biological reality. To understand the power of the checkup, we must deep dive into the specific metrics that form the narrative of metabolic health. The most famous is the fasting plasma glucose test. This measures the amount of sugar in the blood after an 8-hour fast. While useful, it is merely a snapshot of a single moment in time. A person can have normal fasting glucose, but massive spikes after meals. This is why the hemoglobin A1C, HbA1c test is the gold standard of surveillance. This test is a biological time capsule. Glucose in the bloodstream has a tendency to stick to proteins, a process called glycation. Hemoglobin, the protein in red blood cells that carries oxygen, gets sugar-coated. Since red blood cells live for approximately 3 months, the HbA1c test measures the percentage of hemoglobin that is glycated, providing a weighted average of blood sugar levels over the past 90 days. For the elderly, an HbA1c between 5.7% and 6.4% indicates prediabetes. This is the red zone. It is the siren indicating that the metabolic house is smoking even if the fire hasn't fully engulfed the structure. However, the investigative rigor must go deeper. Advanced lipid panels, kidney function tests, EGFR, and liver enzymes provide the context for the sugar numbers. As discussed in entry number 6, diabetes travels with a syndicate of other conditions. An elderly patient might have a borderline sugar level but a plummeting kidney filtration rate. This indicates that the kidneys are already suffering from microvascular damage,
necessitating immediate intervention. The checkup is also the only way to detect silent ischemia, heart damage that occurs without pain, common in diabetics due to nerve damage. An EKG, electrocardiogram, during a routine visit can reveal a heart attack the patient didn't even know they had. The concept of prediabetes warrants a philosophical and medical examination. For years, the medical establishment viewed prediabetes as a waiting room for the inevitable. Today, it is viewed as the window of maximum opportunity. It is a reversible state. The regular health checkup is the mechanism by which this window is identified. When an elderly patient sees their HbA1c creep from 5.8% to 6.1% over 6 months, that trend line is a call to action. It transforms the abstract concept of health into a concrete, manageable project. It allows the physician and patient to deploy the strategies discussed in entries 1 through 9 with targeted precision. If the fasting glucose is high, they look at the liver and late-night eating, entry number 2. If the post-meal numbers are high, they look at fiber and refined carbs, entries number 4 and 5. The data dictates the tactic. Barriers to this surveillance are significant. There is the white coat syndrome, where anxiety raises blood pressure and obscures the truth. There is the economic barrier and the logistical challenge of transportation for seniors with limited mobility. But perhaps the greatest barrier is psychological denial. Many elderly individuals fear the diagnosis, equating diabetes with a death sentence or the loss of independence. They avoid the doctor to avoid the bad news. This ostrich mentality is lethal. The investigative journalist must frame the checkup not as a judgment, but as empowerment. Knowledge is the only antidote to fear. The future of checkups is rapidly evolving with technology. The advent of continuous glucose monitors, CGMs, is revolutionizing prevention. These small wearable sensors, once reserved for type 1 diabetics, are now being used by the health-conscious elderly to see real-time reactions to food. A senior can eat a bowl of oatmeal and watch their phone to see exactly how their blood sugar responds. They can see the direct impact of a 20-minute walk on flattening that curve. This biofeedback loop is more powerful than any lecture from a doctor. It gamifies health. It makes the invisible visible. While not yet standard for everyone,
The integration of CGMs into regular health checkups represents the frontier of personalized preventative medicine. Furthermore, the checkup is the forum for medication review. Polypharmacy, the use of multiple drugs, is rampant in the elderly. Some common medications, such as corticosteroids for arthritis or asthma, thiazide diuretics for blood pressure, and statins, can slightly raise blood sugar levels. A regular review allows the physician to adjust dosages or switch classes of drugs to protect metabolic health. It ensures that the cure for one ailment isn't the cause of another. We must also consider the physical exam components, the foot check and the eye exam. Diabetic retinopathy can cause blindness before a patient realizes their vision is changing. A dilated eye exam can spot the tiny hemorrhages in the retina that signal systemic vascular trouble. Similarly, checking the feet for sensation using a monofilament wire can detect early neuropathy. These physical touches are the low-tech counterparts to the high-tech blood work. They reconnect the patient to their body. In conclusion, Entry Amber 10 is the bridge between intention and reality. It provides the metric of success. Preventing type 2 diabetes in the elderly is a multifactorial, disciplined campaign involving diet, movement, sleep, and stress. But without the regular checkup, we are navigating without a compass. The regular screening enables early intervention, which is the holy grail of geriatrics. It is far easier to turn the ship around when it is miles from the iceberg than when it is scraping against the ice. By committing to regular monitoring, the elderly individual takes ownership of their biology. They declare that they are not passive victims of aging, but active participants in their own longevity. This concludes the investigation into the 10 pillars of defense, from the food on the plate to the thoughts in the mind, from the steps taken on the pavement to the blood drawn in the clinic. Each entry is a vital thread in the tapestry of health. Type 2 diabetes is a formidable adversary, fueled by modern convenience and biological entropy, but it is not invincible. With knowledge, discipline, and the rigorous application of these 10 principles, the elderly can defy the statistics and claim a future of vitality, clarity, and strength. The metabolic time bomb can be diffused. The choice, ultimately, lies in the daily persistent application of these truths.